Welcome to the Numbers Game Week 17 Christmas and TNF Primer, the show where analytics meets the action and data drives the decisions. I'm Cynthia Frelund, and together we'll dive deep into the stats that define this week's Christmas and TNF matchups between the Chiefs and Steelers, the Ravens and Texans, and the Seahawks and Bears to uncover how the numbers make all the difference. It's not just about what happens, it's about why it happens and how the data helps tell the story. As always, I really appreciate you choosing to spend some of your time and energy with me, but especially this week with so much to celebrate, so many plans, so many family members and friends to hang out with. The fact that you're choosing to spend some of your time and energy with me means even more. Let's have a look back before we move forward. I'm recording the show on Monday morning, so we still have one more Week 16 game to go. However, through 15 games of Week 16, my model's tracking at 10 wins and 5 losses straight up, 7.5 and 7.5 ATS, and 8 and 7 on totals. This brings my season through 15/16ths of Week 16 to 70.3% straight up, 52.7 ATS, and 50.4% on totals. Christmas Day games start in Pittsburgh, where the Chiefs come to town as 2.5-point favorites in a game where the total is 43.5 points. The Chiefs would lock up the 1 seed in the AFC with the win, and the Steelers would get closer to securing the North and a home game in the playoffs should they take this one. Not only did Patrick Mahomes rush for 33 yards, his third most in a game this season, but he also had his second rushing touchdown on the year. This isn't to say that his ankle is fine or not a concern, it's just to point out that whether or not you're a Chiefs fan, this is yet another data point for his eventual GOAT argument. On Saturday, the quick passing game was the most efficient part of Mahomes' passing game overall in a win over the Texans. He was 17 of 19 for 155 and a touchdown on these sub 2.5 second passes. His average time to throw for the game was 2.5 seconds, which was the fastest for him since week 4 of 2021. He took 41 total pass attempts and he only held onto the ball for more than 4 seconds in one of them. 4 seconds is what Next Gen Stats distinguishes as an extended dropback. The strategy for Xavier Worthy, which was a successful one, was to leverage his speed in space. He caught 7 of 11 for 65 and a score overall, with 61 of his 65 yards coming as yak. All 7 of his receptions were on passes intended to travel under 10 air yards, which was the highest volume of short passes he's been targeted on to date. Quick passes, or rather a foundation of quick passes and in-rhythm passes, so anything under 4 seconds, will be a big help against the Steelers' dynamic pass rush. While the game plan may not be so Worthy specifically heavy in the catch and run game, shorter passes to leverage the speed of this entire pass-catching core will again be a big deal. Further, we saw the Steelers' run defense allow Derrick Henry to have a massive game. While it's less probable that the Chiefs will have that kind of rushing output, far less probable, these shorter passes with yak can actually function in a similar way. The Chiefs' defense had a 56% pressure rate in the second half against the Texans after a 30% rate in the first half. Overall, they blitzed on a 44% rate, and that was their second highest to date this season. And by the way, both of their sacks came off of blitzes. Chris Jones has 6 pressures in the game, but was also injured. And so far, he's listed on the practice estimation report as would not have practiced. So let's keep an eye on that one. In the Steelers' loss to the Ravens, Russell Wilson was under pressure on 37% of dropbacks, where he went 22 of 31 for 217. 2 touchdowns and a pick was also the results in the end zone. He averaged his longest time to throw of the season, 3.25 seconds. But in the quick game, he was 10 of 10 for 79 with 2 touchdowns, both of them. Breaking down his results by coverage, he used quick passes more when Baltimore gave him single high. His average time to throw was 2.76 seconds against it versus 4.12 seconds against split safety looks. Also noteworthy, Wilson was only blitzed on 5 dropbacks against the Ravens, so that will be a difference because we know the Chiefs defense, they blitz a lot. Another probable change in this one for Pittsburgh is how much single high they use. Against Lamar Jackson on Saturday, they use it on 83% of defensive plays. They do this against the Ravens a lot, though, as it's nearly identical to their 79% rate in Week 11, and that was their first matchup with Jackson. In this matchup, they used man blitzes on 56% of the Ravens' dropbacks, and that percentage is a season high for any team in the NFL. There have been many full games where defensive coordinators will not use a blitz of any sort and not give Mahomes single high even once. Ask Leslie Frazier and Lou Anarumo, who both had success by doing this. My point here, Pittsburgh will have a very different game plan for Mahomes than they did for Jackson. Minkah Fitzpatrick is one of my all-time favorite players to track, and 39 is yet another example of a Steelers Swiss Army knife. Against the Ravens, he had 0 receptions allowed on 3 targets. 2 of them were passes defensed, and 1 was a pick. Should Deshaun Elliott not be able to go, it's likely Fitzpatrick will continue playing more strong safety. Right now, the word is that Elliott has a, quote, real chance to face the Chiefs, but I don't know what that means. Before Week 15, Fitzpatrick's pre-snap average depth to the line of scrimmage was 10.8 yards, and in the 2 games without Elliott, it's been just 7 yards. He was aligned in the box on 24% of plays and in the slot on 27% of plays over the past 2 weeks, compared with being in the box on 5% and in the slot 5% of the time in weeks 1 through 14. I'm going deep on this one because that's a part of how the Chiefs' attack plans could be shaped as quick passes to Fitzpatrick's non-coverage or in his coverage. You don't want to pass it to Fitzpatrick's coverage is what I'm trying to say here. Bottom line, the Chiefs' defense overall gives them a very slim edge. George Pickens is also currently listed as having a, quote, real chance to play. We don't know what that means. And that actually could tip the scales closer, as this is one of the closest games I've modeled out this entire season. I have the Chiefs winning by 1 point, 22-21, but it's actually 21.6 to 20.8. And I point this out because I have this one staying under 43.5 points in 53% of simulations, which is way more certain than the 51.1% that is the number of simulations where Kansas City wins. AKA, their confidence percentage is very likely 16 of the 16 games this week. Technically, I haven't run all of the games yet, but this is my guess. The Ravens and Texans will know the outcome of that game before they kick off for the second Christmas game, which means the Ravens will either be looking to keep pace should the Steelers win, or take the lead in the AFC North if my projection of the Chiefs winning works out. The Ravens are 3-point favorites in H-Town, and as a reminder, Houston has already secured themselves as the winners of the South. The total is 46.5 points in this game. Derrick Henry had a whopping 162 yards on 24 rushes on Saturday against the Steelers. He had 7 explosive runs, remember those are the 10-plus yarders, which was the most such runs by any player in a game this season. Sidebar. Are we really going to live in a world where Derrick Henry isn't at least a strong pound-the-table situation for Offensive Player of the Year at least? Okay, back to where he did his damage against Pittsburgh. He ran inside on 63% of rushes, which was his highest percentage this season so far, and he had 5 of those 7 explosive runs on inside runs. Overall, he forced 10 missed tackles and gained 66 yards off of them. That brings his season total to 678 yards off of forced missed tackles, which is 144 more than the next closest player. Lamar Jackson was 15 of 23 for 207 and 3 touchdowns with an interception against the Steelers. Breaking that down more, he was blitzed on 68% of dropbacks. That's the second highest rate in his career. He went 11 of 16 for 163 with a touchdown and a pick against the blitz. He was also really good against single high. He went 14 of 18 for 193 and 2 of his 3 touchdowns against it. Kyle Van Noy added 1.5 sacks to the bottom line on Saturday, and Marlon Humphrey's first career pick 6, a fourth quarter dagger, highlighted the Ravens' win, and Humphrey, playing different roles in the secondary, seems to be pretty transformative for this pass defense. Fun fact, Humphrey's first child, a son named Duke, was born 4 days before the game. In a loss to the Chiefs, C.J. Stroud went 23 of 29 for 244 with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks overall. Against single high, he had a good outing. He went 12 of 17 for 137 and a touchdown. Both of his interceptions came off split safety shells targeting Nico Collins. He also struggled under pressure, going just 5 of 15 for 82 yards and 1 of those interceptions. Under pressure, his CPOE was negative 9%. When he wasn't pressured, it was positive 7%. Despite only 1 sack of Mahomes, the Texans defense pressured him 16 times. That was a 36% rate. And Will Anderson Jr. led the way with 5 pressures. Bottom line, I have the Ravens taking this one 25-20. Between the Texans losing Tank Dell and the Ravens increasing their defensive efficiency by about 35% in the pass game over the past 2 games, and by the way, I measured this by win share change versus the 4 games prior, Baltimore wins on Christmas. On Boxing Day, aka December 26th, the Seahawks and Bears square off in Chicago. Seattle is a 1.5 point favorite, and the total at Soldier Field is 41.5 points. Geno Smith was most productive against the Vikings' split safety coverages. He was 22 of 31 for 225, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception against them, versus being 9 of 12 for 89 and a pick against single high. He also had his second game of the season with 3 or more touchdowns on downfield passes. He was 9 of 15 for 151 and all 3 touchdowns on those 10-plus air yard attempts. JSN, as in Jackson Smith and Jigba, hauled in 8 passes for 95 yards and a trip to the end zone. He had 4 of those passes for 61 yards and that touchdown versus press. And of course, he added to his slot receiving total, where he now has 294 more yards than the next closest player. The defense sacked Sam Darnold 3 times on 14 pressures. Caleb Williams went 16 of 27 for 261 and had 2 touchdowns on passes where he had a time to throw of over 2.5 seconds against the Lions. That was his best production to date on such passes. Against the Lions overall, he now has 5 touchdowns and no interceptions on such throws, compared to 9 touchdowns with 5 interceptions against all other opponents on these 2.5 or more second throws. Keenan Allen made the most of his opportunities with 9 catches on 13 targets for 141 and a touchdown against Detroit's banged-up defense. He had a season-high 57 yards after the catch, and 5 of his receptions for 110 yards were on targets outside the numbers. That's another area where he reached a season high. The Bears defense allowed Goff to complete 14 of 16 for 243 and 2 touchdowns on play action. That was the most in a single game for any quarterback this season. And Jahmyr Gibbs finished with 109 on the ground, and all 3 of his explosive rushes came on outside runs. Bottom line, the Seahawks do their part to keep their playoff hopes alive, winning 24-20. Remember, in order to make the postseason, they need to win the West. So this is a big deal for the Hawks. Which brings us to our Christmas menu. I will post a menu for TNF as soon as the ingredients become available, aka the props aren't even out as of this recording. But last week we went 5 of 6 with the lone one we missed being Stone Smart to stay under 36.5 yards. He had 37 yards, which is hilarious. Let's stay on track in this one and start where we always do, with the bland items first. Remember, these props happen in at least 55% of my simulations. Number 1, Pat Freiermuth to have more than 30.5 receiving yards. He's only done this in 3 of his past 5 games and not in the most recent 2 games. But this is a position that the Chiefs have been generous to, and Russ looks to his tight end. Number 2, CJ Stroud to pass for more than 247.5 yards. I said the Ravens have improved their pass defense, and they have, but between game script and a tough matchup in the run game, my model has him exceeding this number by more than 20 yards, even though he hasn't in 5 of his past 8 games. Number 3, Dalton Schultz to have more than 35.5 receiving yards. It follows that with no Tank Dell, the other pass catchers have more volume opportunities, but Schultz himself has passed this number in 3 of the past 6 games. On to the spicies. These happen in at least 48% of my simulations, but have the kind of volatility that make the juice worth a squeeze. 2 bland and a spicy, that is a normal amount of risk. I prefer 2 spicies and a bland, but mix it up as you like. Number 1, Russell Wilson to rush for more than 12.5 yards. He's exceeded this number in the past 3 games, and even with Chris Jones being banged up or potentially not playing, the potential for the blitz and pressure to impact Russell drives this over. Number 2, Patrick Mahomes to rush for more than 16.5 yards. The O-line issues for the Chiefs are by no means solved, and this defensive front is relentless. He could easily exceed this number on 3rd down attempts alone. And number 3, Nico Collins to score a touchdown. With CJ Stroud throwing 2 picks last week on passes intended for Collins, this drives up some tasty odds on this, but he gets into the end zone in 48.4% of my simulations. Merry, happy everything. Christmas, Hanukkah, family, friends, pets, whatever you're celebrating, I hope you enjoy it and you feel the magic that is this season. I am so grateful for the magic we make here together, and I will see you back here for that full episode with the rest of the Week 17 games in a few days. And of course, projections, scores, and more, they will be ready for you to use on Tuesday, the 24th. Thank you so much for hanging out. And if you like the show, please like, subscribe, and pass it along so we can continue to grow.